Paul, thank you for joining us, who's the CEO of NBSV Worldwide and Fairventures Social Forestry. We really appreciate you taking our time to come here and have this conversation with us.
Yeah, many thanks, Krishna, for having me today. So very happy to tell a bit about our business and how we have experienced the whole process of this very exciting window. I want to kick it off telling a bit about Fairventures, actually. So we are a developer of agroforestry projects active in Indonesia. The total team is around 40 people, of which 35 are based in Indonesia. A relatively small team working from Europe. And that also shows our philosophy that we really believe that in order to succeed as a project developer in Indonesia, you really need to build and develop a local team, which has the expertise and the skills to be successful as a developer in the mid to long run. We started our business end of 2018, actually, with a pilot project in Central Kalimantan. And we are now in quite an exciting phase because we are about to commence work on two new projects, one located in Eastern Java and the other one in Jambi. So as an agroforestry developer in Indonesia, we actually focus on the social forestry program. And the social forestry program is a very ambitious program from the government of Indonesia in order to issue long-term 35-year land leases to local communities who live on or nearby forest lands, because around 90% of the forest land is held by the state in Indonesia. Up until now, 6.4 million hectares have been issued under this social forestry program, and it's a target to double towards 13 million by 2030. So it's quite a big area potential, this social forestry. 12 to 30 million, about 1/3 the size of Germany. So you can imagine that it's significant. Social forestry. So how it works is that, let's say, local communities or smallholders can set up an entity, become a member of that entity. Could be a farmer group, which is a bit of a light version, but could also be a cooperative. And then that entity applies for the social forestry permits. So in the end, for the 35-year permit, allowing its members to utilize the land. So the land that is owned by the state, right? So, I mean, we have been active on such a social forestry permit since end of 2018. We have also carefully followed the sector in all those years and also dived a bit into empirical research related to social forestry and actually identified some areas for improvement. To name a few examples, quite some entities holding these social forestry permits are quite weak in terms of governance. So there's not a very clear management structure within these entities. As a result, quite often the members are not selling through the entity, but they're just selling themselves to middlemen, for example. Also, there's no clear allocation of tasks and responsibilities within those entities. Then some other observations relate to the fact that product sales are quite unstable. So in Indonesia, there is a multi-layer middleman structure if you analyze the supply chain. And the first 1 to 2 layers of middlemen quite often act extremely opportunistic, which means that the smallholders get certain indications regarding species and quantities the middlemen are looking for to buy. But then, for example, a year later or 2 years later, half a year later, the picture suddenly looks quite different. And that is, of course, very harmful to the smallholders, because the smallholders are really eager to have a long-term stable off-taker for their products. Another observation relates to the reforestation obligations. So according to the Indonesian law, around at least 50% of a permit area needs to consist of forest. While in practice, that's only 10 up until 20% max. Because as you can imagine, if you plant timber seedlings, it takes a long time before income is generated out of the timber. So instead of planting timber, the members quite often plant crops, or as I call it, non-timber forest products in Indonesia, which are much more shorter rotating, generating faster revenues, but in the end, they don't comply with the legislation around social forestry. We believe with our model that we have find a way to tackle part of these challenges. And the key approach is actually that we very much support the co-ops or the entities holding the social forestry permits to really strengthen the governance of those entities. And we cooperate with local NGOs in order to achieve that strengthening. Plus, we operate as a long-term off-taker of the products. And that also quite often includes a pre-financing element, because we have good connections to ultimate processors or end off-takers of certain products. In that way, we can better predict what the mid to long-term demands will look like out of the private markets. And then by pre-financing seedlings and other inputs, as they call it, we can achieve a better match between the production by the smallholders and the ultimate demand from out of the markets. Yeah, so in the end, we are simplifying and professionalizing the supply chain, with a very important note that you cannot just simply try to completely leave out the middleman in the structure, because the first two layers of middlemen often have an important function in the communities as well. So you need to make them part of the solution in the end. That can be done by actively involving them one way or the other at the co-op or at the farmer group level. So I hope that gives a bit of an idea regarding our business. This is a bit about our pilot project. So 3,000 hectares Central Kalimantan under a social forestry permit. So there we closed a 30-year cooperation contract with a co-op holding that social forestry permit. And we are active on around 1,600 hectares with a combination of having planted timber species, but also crops on around 450 hectares, but also now very actively rolling out contract farming on the rubber jungle part of that area. Regarding the rubber part, we also very much help the farmers to professionalize their ways of working, and that relates to the way they tap the trees, for example, but also the equipment they use for tapping. Also some of the milestones and achievements. So we have closed a carbon offtake contract with steel in the past. So that's a German multinational known from the gardening equipment they produce. That is based on let's say, a more like a CSR program of steel. So there are no credits involved there, but it's more a CSR program. And we have closed an impact loan with the UBS Optimus Foundation, where the interest rates are linked to certain impact KPIs we target, such as local employment, but also gender equality and carbon sequestration. We are also in the process of closing an offtake contract with the German offtaker for the rubber part, actually. So I hope that gives a bit of an idea what our business model is. This is our showcase in Central Kalimantan. As I indicated some minutes ago, we are now about to start our new projects, one in East Java, social forestry permit, around 850 hectares, and another similar kind of permit on Jambi.
How helpful was the design process for you? Because obviously you were awarded proof of concept through this new window, but we previously through one of Convergence's other design funding windows also had the feasibility study. So what's been sort of your learnings and experience as part of both of those in terms of the feasibility study and what's in store for proof of concept? And if you can share some of those learnings and observations with everyone, that'll be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Many thanks, Krishna. So I think what is extremely important to not do is actually to make it too complicated in the beginning. So I remember when I started designing a structure for our business, a blended finance structure, and we can move on to the next slide, by the way, was that there's always a tendency to perhaps over design or over engineer at the beginning, having some sort of sophisticated fund ideas in mind. But in the end, I think what's extremely important to keep in mind and to acknowledge is, in the end, investors have a certain preferred way of potentially investing into your business. So what kind of structure can you develop where you still have most flexibility to serve those investors in an efficient way, while at the same time you want to set next steps with your business, and with the funds that are available, make progress, because progress is also extremely important to show to the outside world. So I think it's finding that balance, not make it too overly complicated, keep it efficient, low cost and lean. At the same time, have it set up in such a way that hopefully when you are able to secure that big ticket, that you have the flexibility in the structure to accommodate it. I think that is extremely important. What we did as well is, for example, read through the very interesting materials on the Convergence website regarding studies that were done by Convergence in the past. Give you an example. What you quite often see with these blended finance vehicles is that the domestic market, the domestic investment market, is not very heavily involved in terms of investing into the structure. So a way how we took that into account, for example, is including that, you see it's PTWLI in our structure. So that's a 100% Indonesian held entity. And that entity actually opens the door for Indonesian investors to invest into our business. Because Indonesian investors are not so eager to invest through Singapore. They rather invest through an Indonesian holding entity that they, in a legislation they are familiar with. So I would also advise to look into these very interesting studies and see how you could use it in your own situation.
Now, talking a bit on your, the application experience, and you've applied to us a few times and have been successful as well. What in your experience has been some of the key things that, as part of the app, like when you're applying for a new proposal like this, not only to us but maybe to other programs too, what are some of the things that applicants should be mindful of when, or to emphasize on when you're applying to programs like ours?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, of course, an obvious one is very good and sharp planning, because what you don't want to have is to hurry and to work day and night in the last few days before the deadline comes. So I think the basis is a very good planning. What I also appreciated a lot, evaluating a bit the process, is involving different colleagues with different skills, such that they can either contribute to the drafting process, they can do a bit of research, they can some can be involved in proofreading the notes, and really make it a team effort internally. I think that's also extremely important. Some other points that I noted from the full process relates to the due diligence interviews with the externals. If you get to that stage, the importance of really be extremely proactive and not wait too long, but just start updating people about this interview process, and also make sure you have backups, right? If some person cannot facilitate that interview for one reason or the other, make sure you always have backups. I think that's also important. Another one I would like to emphasize relates to the part where Q&A takes place, mostly written Q&A with the Convergence team. I would also say try to keep a good speed in that process, because in the end, I would say Convergence team, Krishna and the others, are presenting your case internally. So the more convincing, the better information you can share in the fastest way possible, the more it helps you, Krishna, I guess, and the team to really get to a very good understanding of the idea, and to then be able to present it to the different decision-making bodies. So yeah, that I believe that would be my key points. So teamwork, team approach, and then regarding the DD interviews with externals, be very strict and sharp on that. And then the Q&A, keep a very good speed in that process. That would be my three main points, I would say. Yeah.
Were there any elements that you focused on, or any way of sort of writing or emphasizing on the proposals themselves, and any insights there that you can share with prospective applicants?
Yeah, I would like to highlight 2 points actually. So for us, I mean, we are active since end of 2018, 5 years of implementation experience. So what have been our learnings during that 5 years, and how does that influence our business model going forward? In the end, it's about a business model that needs to be bought into by external investors. So key learnings: how does it impact your business model? That's one. Second one would be show that you are in interaction with investors, such that you can, in a way, show that you keep on talking to investors and discussing ideas. Because in the end, it's extremely important that you get input from the potential investors. To give you an example, there may be investors saying, first we want to see you ticking off milestones ABC, for example, right? Because that's for them a sort of sign that you have de-risked the business model sufficiently, for example, right? So that kind of information is showing that you are talking to investors, and that you take that information with you, and that you try to get closer to the needs from the market. I think that's also extremely important, because in the end, it needs to become investable and bankable, right? So yeah, I would say those would be my 2 key points.